Hi all and welcome to another video. In this one we're going to be going over dependency injection and specifically the lifetime information that are encapsulated into the keywords singleton, scoped and transient. We'll go over the differences between them as well as when you might want to use each option. Don't forget, if you like my content and want to see more, please leave a like and subscribe if you want to. It really does help the channel. Now, the easiest way to explain this is to dive straight into an example. And we're going to create 4 interfaces. We're going to have a base interface, and all this base interface will have is a public GUID called value, and it will just have a setter. The other 3 interfaces we're going to create are going to be our lifetime interfaces. So we'll have an iSingleton, which will just inherit from our iBase interface, and then we will do the exact same for both our scoped and for our transient. Now we just want a class that will implement all of these, and we'll just call this our implementation class. And this will implement iSingleton, and iScoped, and also our iTransient. We'll implement this interface quickly, and then all we'll do is in our constructor, we will give this value a new value of GUID.newGUID. Now that this is set up, we need to go and configure these in our program. So to do that, we could do builder.services.addSingleton, and then we'll set iSingleton equal to our implementation class. And we'll do the same for both scoped and transient. Scoped becomes an add scoped, and it'll be iScoped and then our implementation class. And we will do an add transient with our iTransient and our implementation class. Now, to make it easier, so we don't have to create another controller, we'll just make use of our weather controller. We'll remove all of this unnecessary things that we don't want. We'll change our HTTP get just so it's a get with no name. And we'll tell this to return an iAction result. Now, in our constructor, we're going to create our singleton. We're going to create our scoped, and we're going to create our transient. And we'll just implement these and give these read-only fields. And in our get, we'll create 3 variables. Singleton, which is equal to our underscore singleton dot value. Then we'll do the same with our underscore scoped, our underscore transient, and we'll just change these variable names. Now we want to be able to return these, so again what we'll do is we'll just create a new class here. We'll call this our response model, and this will just have a GUID for our singleton value. And then we'll do the old copy paste, and we'll end up with a scope value and a transient value. In the get, we'll create a new object. Our response is equal to a new response model, and we'll set these values in here. So singleton value is equal to our singleton. Our scope value is equal to our scoped, and our transient value is equal to our transient. We'll return these in an OK result, an OK object result. We should do OK actually with our response. Perfect. And now we can run this and we can see what our swagger looks like. Okay, so here's our get weather forecast. If we execute this, you'll see that we have 3 values. 3 complete separate GUIDs, each of them have been instantiated with a new value. Now, let's focus first on singleton. And you'll notice that if we make another request, so this singleton GUID status 38E0, we execute it again, our singleton value is never changing. It is always going to be the same singleton no matter how many times I click this execute button. And the reason for this is that the singleton is only ever instantiated one time. Once it's been created, it will never be destroyed until the actual application dies. So if I was to go here and stop rider, and then rerun it, open up a brand new Swagger page and do it again, only now will we get a different singleton value. But if we execute it again, I'll continually get the 924A611E. This makes it really useful for storing things that are consistent throughout the application. Things like app settings, or also services where you don't actually need to store any information that doesn't need to be instantiated regularly. Things like if you're sending emails, like an email service, that's a really nice thing to register as a singleton. It's a very simple service, does one thing only, doesn't store any real state, just exists, doesn't need to be recreated. Now, let's have a look at a scoped and transient, because if I was to execute again here, you'll see that each time they both get a brand new value. So what's the difference between them? Well, to understand this, we actually need to make another change to our code. We're going to go to our response model, and we're going to copy these two, and we're going to call this our second scoped value, and we'll call this our second transient value. And importantly as well, we're going to inject two more values. So we'll call this our second scope, and we'll create a new read-only field, and we'll also call this our second transient, and create a new field. In here, we'll set our second scope value equal to underscore second scope dot value, and we'll do the same with our transient. We'll create our second transient value, and that's equal to second transient dot value. Now, if we run it again, you'll start to understand what the difference is between scoped and transient. You'll see that we have a scoped value of 1B2624C, and the second scope value is exactly the same. If we rerun this again, you'll get a different value for scoped, but the two scope values remain identical, F3EC. And then again, we've got 7EA, 7EA. Now pay attention to the transient, and you'll see both the transient values are completely different in every single request. Now, the reason for this is that scoped is scoped to a single request, in this instance a HTTP request. As soon as this request finishes, the scope session has ended and all the instances are destroyed. And then when you make another request, they're recreated again. So the constructor is created on every new scoped request, in this instance a HTTP request, whereas a transient is created every time it is requested. If I was to go to this class and say, okay, give me 5 instances of iTransient, I will get 5 completely separate instances, and they'll all give me a completely separate value. So scoped lifetimes are very useful when you want to track something across a single request. Think about things like if you're logging information in your application, you might have a correlation ID, which is an ID that tracks all of your log messages through that one request. So request comes in, it gets an ID, then every time you log, it also gets that same ID, so you know exactly what happened to that request all the way through the flow. Transients, however, are very useful if you want to ensure that your service remains stateless. You can guarantee that every time you make a request, you get a brand new instance. I hope that's helpful, and I hope it gives you a bit of a better understanding of what a singleton is, a scoped is, and a transient is, and where you can use them. And that's going to be the end of this video. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.